What a successful conference. I used to run conferences for a living. That's how I worked my way through college. I ran every Star Trek and Star Wars convention on the West Coast of the United States. You're doing a better job with this one than I did with the ones I had. I'm going to disappoint a few of you. I'm not going to talk about US politics except indirectly. And the reason is, like someone you know, I believe in miracles. And you had a miracle here last weekend, and I'm going to try to give you a Yanks perspective on it. Now, I'm fully aware that how generous and open-minded it is to have two Yanks give back-to-back keynote speeches to an Aussie audience. We're not known for being shy. The term ugly American exists for a reason. And we should all be more humble as Americans in giving advice to people in countries we aren't fully expert in. I'm not an expert in Australia, but I have studied your elections, and I have studied elections around the world. And there is a pattern. Brexit in Britain, 2016. The Trump election in 2016. Various other countries, from Israel to Austria, but in the Anglosphere, Australia's last weekend. And Canada is next. Watch out, Justin Trudeau. That's October. And I have some lessons. First of all, yes, the shy Tory phenomenon is universal and worldwide. People are not going to tell a perfect stranger who calls them up and say they're a public opinion pollster exactly always what they think and believe. And if proof was ever needed, the exit poll in your election was 52 Labor, 48 Coalition. I don't think that's how it worked out. Campaigns matter. One of the things I've noticed is the left no longer wants to debate ideas. They hate campaigns because an idea might sneak into them. Campaigns matter because if you bring the issues to the indifferent voter, the voter who doesn't normally pay a lot of attention to politics, they often vote on the basis of common sense. And the Labour Party platform was many things, but it was not common sense. The quiet Australians, what a wonderful phrase Scott Morrison coined. What a wonderful phrase. And Warren Mundine picked up on that. Remember what he said at the dinner last night. He said, we pay far too much attention to the noise in politics. We need to pay more attention to the silences in politics. The silent majority in Australia. Now, because you have compulsory voting, this observation applies particularly to you. You have an awful lot of people who vote who, frankly, aren't that into politics. There are an awful lot of people in Australia who want to forget about politics and get on with the serious business of living, which is their family, their job, their career, their hobbies, their faith, their community, their interests. For them, politics is not more than an abstraction often. It doesn't seem to have much to do with their daily lives. It's your job to make it meaningful to them and to tell them there are real choices in politics and they have to make them. You know, Frederick Bastiat is famous for the seen and the unseen essay. He talked about, for example, with free trade. The benefits of free trade are highly hidden. I mean, you don't see the jobs created by free trade. They're amorphous. You can't pin them down. You can't shake their hand. You can see the jobs lost through free trade. It's the factory that shuts down. It's the uncompetitive business that has to shed workers. So the benefits are hidden, unseen. The costs often all too seen. Now, the same thing applies in politics, the seen and the unseen. We see all of the interest groups and the identity politics people raising the noise that Warren mentioned. We don't see the silent people. We only see them through a glass darkly on election day. But that's who votes, and that's who created the coalition's majority. Now, what are the lessons from this election going forward? Well, I'm going to be bold here and tell you that nothing I'm going to tell you is original. I spent the last 3 days in Australia talking to lots of you. In fact, I even went off campus and talked to 2 Labour politicians. So this is the consensus of, I think, the best ideas I've heard from you, and I'm synthesizing them and giving them back to you. So these aren't Yank ideas. These are universal ideas based on universal values, and that includes Australia values. The first thing you have to do with this victory is, I think, make sure that the government's good program gets over the finish line. And I know there's problems in the Senate. There's a couple moderates you probably will have to win over in addition to the conservative crossbenchers. But I think you can do that. And of course, you know the House of Representatives is going to be pretty solid. Do all that you can to get the good parts of the coalition's program across the finish line. Show yourself as loyal allies, willing to cooperate and willing to help the government. But then, of course, it's a 3-year term, and there's lots to do. Don't just play defense, keep up the offense. And my suggestion to you is, for the next few months, have your meetings, talk to your think tanks and your activist organizations, and come up with an agenda for what's after the government's program, that you can press them and try to convince them to make their own. It can be anything. It can be free speech. It can be transparency in government, putting every government checkbook on the internet, perhaps. Religious freedom, school choice, tax, anything that Roger Douglas said in the panel yesterday about reforming the civil service, all of that great. And please turn out to hear him tomorrow morning. And there's a whole range of things in the environment you can do. Free market environmentalism is a burgeoning academic study in the United States. I know there's been some work here. You had a great panel on it. I think you can push that forward, go on offense on the environment, stay off of defense. So come up with 1 or 2 ideas, maybe borrowing one from the social conservatives and one from the free market community, and go to the government and say, this is our agenda, this is the activist agenda, this is the agenda that wasn't cooked up at the back rooms or in focus groups, this comes from the grassroots. You're the grassroots. And if you do that, if you make that offer, I think they'll say yes. I think they'll say yes because you'll have tested it and it will be realistic but radical at the same time. And it will push the ball forward towards liberty. And Grover is going to give a great speech on how to build a coalition for whatever ideas you come up with. Grover is the world's master on coalition politics. So, what if they say no? Well, then it gets interesting. Because I think the time for us to trust the traditional parties in Australia implicitly and completely is over. We heard in the panel on the future of the Liberal Party, a collapse in trust in institutions and in government, membership declining of both Labour and Liberals. People don't trust them anymore. They don't like the backroom deals of either party. Well, let's push things out into the front room. You know, I'll tell you, all of the politicians that I've talked to, almost all, in Australia, say we need a 4-year parliamentary term. We spend the first year getting into our seats, finding out where the bathroom is. We spend the second year legislating, and the third year we get preparing for the next election. The same debate is happening in New Zealand. There's some justice and some reasonableness and some intelligence behind that argument. I'm willing to go with it, but let's have something that accompanies it. And here's my bold offer. I believe that you have a democracy deficit in this country. Boy, you're nothing like Europe. By the way, Jean-Claude Juncker, the president of the European Union, you know him? This is what he said the day that Europe voted for European Parliament last week. He said, these populist nationalists, these stupid nationalists, why, they're in love with their own countries. You're not nearly that bad. But you have a democracy deficit. And here's one piece of evidence. Your first parliament in 1901. 28% of your first parliament was made up of lawyers or politicians. The rest were laborers, journalists. Oh, I can't have everything. Some bad apples get in. Farmers, a clergyman, a doctor, a tinsmith, a carpenter, a butcher, a market gardener, and 2 hat makers. Okay, obsolescence, we won't have those anymore. Guess what the percentage is today? 97% are from the law, or they work in a vested business interest or in politics itself. Many of them have campaigned as student politicians and worked as staffers or union delegates. I'm calling out you, Bill Shorten, before becoming MPs. Something has happened in the Republic. I mean, come now. From 28% to 97%? I'm using Plato's Republic. I didn't say Australia was a republic. I do know something about this country. I believe you have to have true diversity. 97% is not true diversity. Let's broaden the system. Let's have a discussion about something that has changed American politics. Let's finally have a discussion about term limits. Now, I don't know if there's ever been a poll taken on term limits in Australia, but if it were, I'd bet a lot of money that at least 75% of Australians would say, go for it. Go, mate. I believe that even if it never happens, the debate is healthy because it's going to address the careerist problems and the democracy deficit. Look, I have nothing against professional politicians individually, but as a whole, you know the old saying, the cream rises to the top in politics until it curdles. And I see a lot of curdling. I think that Matthew O'Donnell of the Center for Independent Studies said, if people in office had a use-by date, make it 12 years, make it 15 years, there will be a change in who runs for office and in what they do once they are there. The limit would encourage a more diverse set of political candidates, reduces the lifetime payoff of working for the party machine, while also shortening the time required to become a minister, making running for office more attractive to high-caliber candidates from other fields of work. In conclusion, obviously everyone in government is going to hate this. Everyone in journalism is going to hate this. Journalists love having sources. You're taking away their sources after a set period of time? Horrors. Lobbyists will hate this. Lobbyists exist on having contacts that stay in place for years. The bureaucrats really will hate it because ultimately it's the old-time servers who can be seduced by the bureaucracy and get tired and inattentive and don't pay attention. It's people new to the system who see things with fresh eyes and perhaps want to shake up the system. So everyone in government is going to hate this. And of course, the challenge is very, very difficult. It has to be a referendum. Well, you've had 44 referendums in the last 118 years, since 1901. It's about every 3 years. But in the last 30 years, you've only had 3. That's part of your democracy deficit. The referendum is dying out. I think it's an integral part of a fresh, free, functioning, vibrant democracy. So, work with the government, work with the coalition, push forward your ideas, but we need to shake up the system even more. And if the government won't shake up the system with you, shake up the system without them. I think you're on the way. I think you've won the argument with a lot of the quiet Australians. I think you can broaden that argument. I think you can win even more votes next time. But you've got to convince people that you're not part of the status quo. You have to distance them from the old way of governing. You have to think anew. Now, I know that much of what I've said is either wrong, incomplete, or unrealistic. But as I said in the beginning, I believe in miracles. And if you think last Saturday was a miracle, I think there can be others in our future. Thank you.
Questions? So we have time for a couple of questions, so please keep submitting them via the app. The first question is, there's an argument that term limits empowers the bureaucrats who have been around for 30 years, who know how to manipulate the system, versus more inexperienced politicians. There is apparently some evidence from the US, from states that have term limits, which people who make this argument use. How would you respond to this?
What is the most important lesson when listening to a politician? Watch what they do, not what they say. This argument is interesting because there was a survey taken of 1,200 lobbyists, bureaucrats, career bureaucrats, and journalists in Washington about the question of term limits. A private survey. Overwhelmingly, all three groups, journalists, lobbyists, bureaucrats, hated term limits. So they may say they will be empowered, but when the people opposing an idea say, don't vote for this because it will give us more power, how sincere do you think they are? It's preposterous. Watch what they say and do. They oppose term limits because, for the reason I said, the longest serving members are the ones most comfortable with the bureaucracy. They're the ones who have given up, who are tired, who are checking out. I was talking with Jacinta Price, Warren Snowden, 30 years. How active do you think he is? So I say it's the younger members, the people from outside the legal political party machine community that might ask questions, that might start reforming the civil service the way Roger Douglas did in New Zealand. And Roger Douglas told me yesterday it was the first-term members in New Zealand that were the biggest supporters of his reforms of the civil service. Watch what the bureaucrats say in private surveys, not what the supporters of the status quo claim the bureaucrats want.
Okay, our second question is, I think, well, a number of people want to know, and we're not going to let you get off the stage without at least giving us a brief analysis of what's happening in US politics, what's happening with the Trump administration, and who's Trump going to win, who is going to be the Democratic candidate that Trump will beat in 2020.
I think there's still a 20 or 25% chance Donald Trump does not run for re-election. I don't have time to go into that. You can discuss it with me individually. But he is perfectly capable, since this is a man who turns on a coin, flip, he's perfectly capable of announcing, I have made America great again. How much more great can I make it? But on the assumption that there's a 75–80% chance that he will run, it's going to be tough because his approval ratings are not good. His approval ratings on the economy are very positive compared to what they were, because the economy, as Grover has mentioned and will tell you, is very strong. But remember, the choice is not yes or no on Donald Trump. It's a binary choice. Donald Trump will have an opponent with all kinds of weaknesses. And you think your Labor Party became a bunch of Mad Hatters in this election. Just wait till the Democrats pick a candidate. I think Joe Biden is yesterday's grandfather's party. And I think they're going to chew him up and spit him out. And I think we're going to have a party that's so loony left, its left hand doesn't know what its extreme left hand is doing. So I believe it's going to be a choice. Well, I'm going to simplify it for you. If it's Trump versus a Democrat, and I think it will be Kamala Harris from California, she checks all of the identity politics boxes. I mean, she's almost like a laboratory experiment created as a candidate. I think the choice is going to be mean versus crazy. Donald Trump is not warm and cuddly. He can be very mean. I've known the man for 30 years. He's the only person I've ever met who has both forms of ADD. Children's ADD, which means you can't pay attention, and adult ADD, which means you need attention. He has both forms in terminal condition. But his policies, I mean, he has an instinct for the right policy that is amazing. So if it's mean versus crazy, I put my money on crazy. I put my money on mean.
Stop. Oh, I believe that unfortunately we've just been given that yes, we unfortunately have run out of time for questions.
I'll be around.
You'll be around.
I also speak tomorrow, and you can ask me questions after that panel.
Excellent.
I think my panel is at 11 o'clock.
Lovely. Thank you very much for coming and joining us at the Creamer Conference once again.
Thank you.